The road through rural Alabama stretched south from Montgomery. Elijah's old Ford pickup truck plowed through the cotton fields, while Shadow sat in the back seat, carefully surveying the surroundings. The dog's amber eyes assessed this new landscape, the smells, the sounds, the news carried by the wind. Have you ever felt like the atmosphere told you you're not welcome when you went somewhere? For Elijah, that feeling began as soon as they crossed the Millbrook town line. The sign at the entrance to the town was old. Millbrook, established 1843, population 327. Shadow tensed up as they entered the town. The dog's instincts were telling him something was wrong here. The main street resembled a typical southern town. Old buildings, houses with wide porches, life moving slowly. But Elijah sensed the suspicion in the eyes looking out the windows. The coldness in the stares directed at the stranger. "Shadow, this place is very different from Montana," he said, stroking the dog's head. Their first stop would be the neighborhood where the burned church stood. The GPS directed them to the south side of town, ironically the wrong side of the railroad tracks. When they turned onto MLK Boulevard, the scenery changed. The houses were smaller, the yards more neglected. Most of the people living here were black, and everyone was watching them. "Stranger alarm," Elijah muttered. Then he saw it. The ruins of New Hope Baptist Church. Elijah pulled the car over and stopped. Shadow immediately jumped up, his nose working. The sight of a building that had stood for 150 years reduced to rubble was heartbreaking. The stone foundations remained, but the rest of the wooden structure had turned to ash. Fire department tape still surrounded the area, but no one seemed to be guarding the scene. As soon as Shadow got out of the car, he headed straight for the fire site. The dog's body language had changed. He was now in detective mode. "All right, partner, let's get to work." As Elijah surveyed the area, he saw an elderly black woman approaching. She was in her 60s with grey hair but a youthful fire in her eyes. "You must be Mr. Brooks," the woman said. "I'm Reverend Johnson's sister, Dolores Jackson." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Jackson. This is Shadow." Shadow approached the woman and wagged his tail slightly. The dog sensed her sincerity. "Thomas is waiting for you. Come right away, you have a lot to talk about." They found Reverend Thomas Johnson at the community center he was using as a temporary office. He was in his 50s, a strong-built, calm but determined man. His face bore deep sorrow. "Mr. Brooks, God bless you for coming," he said with a warm handshake. "Reverend Johnson, my condolences. It's a great loss. 150 years. My great-great-grandfather helped build that church. It was where newly freed slaves first worshipped." Shadow sniffed around the room. There was a burnt smell on the Reverend's desk, on his clothes, his belongings. "What's the police saying?" Elijah asked. The Reverend's face hardened. "Chief Wilson says electrical malfunction. Old wiring short circuit. Do you believe that?" "Mr. Brooks, the electrical system in that church was redone last year. Everything was brand new." Shadow suddenly raised his head. There were sounds at the door. Police Chief Wilson entered. He was a large white man in his mid-40s. He wore a formal police uniform, but his demeanor tried to appear friendly. "Reverend Johnson, you have a visitor, I see." "Chief Wilson, let me introduce Mr. Elijah Brooks. He's from Washington." Wilson's eyes lit up. "Washington? What kind of work?" "Private investigator," Elijah said diplomatically. Shadow was studying Wilson. The dog's posture changed, more alert, more suspicious. "Mr. Brooks, if you have any questions about this tragic event, I'd be happy to help." "Thank you, Mr. President. Has the cause of the fire been definitively determined?" "Yes, electrical failure. Old buildings, you know." "Unfortunately, these things happen." Reverend Johnson interjected. "President Wilson, the church's electrical system—" "Reverend, the report is clear," Wilson cut him off. "The official investigation is closed." Shadow took a step toward Wilson. The dog's gaze intensified. "Nice dog," Wilson said, but he looked uncomfortable. "Shadow can tell good people from bad." Wilson's smile froze. "Interesting ability." "It is. Shadow is never wrong." Mayor Wilson stood up. "Mr. Brooks, Millbrook is a quiet town. There's nothing to cause trouble here. Let's hope it stays that way." After Wilson left, the room fell silent. "Reverend," Elijah said, "tell us the real story." Reverend Johnson took a deep breath. The day before the fire, graffiti had been written on the church walls. "What kind of graffiti?" "The N-word. Cross symbols." "Go back to Africa," Shadow growled. For the first time he was showing hostility so clearly. "Did anyone see this graffiti?" Yes, I wiped it all off. I notified Police Chief Wilson. What did he say? Childish pranks, he said. Elijah took notes. Did you take any photos? Yes, but the phone is missing. Missing? How? On the night of the fire, my house was burglarized. They only took the phone. This couldn't be a coincidence. Shadow went to the window and looked outside. A police car was parked on the street. Reverend, is the KKK still active in town? Johnson's face fell, not officially. But some families, they keep up the traditions. Which families? The Caldwells, the Morrisons, the Hendersons, the old families of the town. Elijah committed these names to memory. Are there any witnesses to the night of the fire? Mrs. Williams, she lives across the street. But she's afraid to talk. Shadow suddenly stood up and looked toward the door. The dog's ears were perked up. Car noises were coming from outside. Multiple vehicles. Elijah looked out the window. 3 pickup trucks had parked on the street. Tough-looking white men were getting out of them. Reverend, is there a back exit? Yes, why? Shadow doesn't like them. And Shadow has good taste. They went out the back door. Shadow led the way, finding the safe route. By the time Elijah reached his car, the men in front had disappeared. But the message was clear. They weren't welcome. Shadow, it's our first day and we've already caused trouble. The dog sat beside him and wagged his tail, as if he enjoyed causing trouble. That evening, they stayed at the only motel on Main Street, Southern Comfort Inn, an ironic name in this situation. The motel owner was an old white man. He muttered as he checked them in. Extra charge for the dog. How much? $20. Per night. It was daylight robbery, but he didn't argue. After settling into their room, Elijah turned on the TV. The local news channel was reporting on a fire. The cause of the fire at New Hope Baptist Church has been determined to be an electrical malfunction. The 150-year-old historic building was completely destroyed. Police Chief Wilson announced that the investigation is closed. There was no mention of the racist graffiti. Elijah's phone rang. Reverend Johnson was calling. Mr. Brooks, Mrs. Williams wants to talk to you. But secretly. Where? Midnight at the old cotton mill. The abandoned place. Is it safe? Mrs. Williams says it's safe. No one goes there. Okay, Shadow and I will be there. After hanging up, he looked at Shadow. Partner, this town has a lot of secrets. The dog shook its head as if to confirm the agreement. As midnight approached, Elijah and Shadow quietly left the motel. They parked the car a few blocks away and walked to the factory. The old cotton mill was on the edge of town. A large, dark, abandoned building. Shadow moved cautiously, listening for every sound. Inside, an elderly black woman was waiting. 65 years old, trembling but determined. I'm Evelyn Williams, she said softly. Mr. Brooks, this is Shadow. Shadow approached the woman and stood respectfully. I saw everything that night, said. Mrs. Williams, what did you see? 2 vehicles arrived, pickups, at 2:30 in the morning. How many people were there? 4 or 5, all white. They weren't wearing masks. Did you recognize them? Mrs. Williams hesitated. Mr. Brooks, I've lived in this town for 65 years. I know everyone. Who were they? Jake Henderson. Billy Caldwell. Derek, Morrison's son. And there was one more. Who? Deputy Sheriff Tom Bradley. Elijah was shocked. The police were involved. What did they do? They poured gasoline on the church. They surrounded it. Then they set it on fire. Any other witnesses? Mrs. Carter saw it too, but she's afraid to talk. Shadow suddenly pricked up his ears. There was a noise outside. Someone's coming, Elijah whispered. Mrs. Williams panicked. If they see me. Shadow, safe exit? The dog immediately headed for the back. There was an exit through the hole. Pickup truck sounds were coming from outside. The same group had followed Mrs. Williams. We're leaving, Elijah said. They exited through the back hole. Shadow led the way silently. When they reached their car, Mrs. Williams was trembling. Mr. Brooks, I can't run anymore. This town is my home. We'll protect you. How? The police are with them. Elijah was determined. We'll uncover the truth. Like Danny's case. Mrs. Williams didn't know who Danny was, but she saw Elijah's determination. Shadow and I will stay here. We won't leave you alone. The woman stroked the dog's head. This dog is special, isn't he? Shadow can smell injustice. The next morning, Elijah got up early. Shadow was ready too. It was time to examine the fire site in daylight. At the New Hope Baptist Church ruins, Shadow immediately got to work. The dog's nose led him to specific spots. Elijah documented the area with photos. The pattern of the fire really looked more like gasoline ignition than an electrical malfunction. Shadow stopped at the back of the church and barked. Elijah looked. There was a piece of metal in the dirt. A gasoline can lid. Good job, Shadow, the dog continued. This time he stopped under a tree next to the church. There was another piece of metal here. A lighter. The evidence is mounting. Shadow found a third thing, a piece of white fabric among the bushes in front of the church. What's this? There was a red stain on the fabric. It was unclear whether it was blood or something else. Just then a police car pulled up. Chief Wilson got out. Mr. Brooks, what are you doing on private property? Public property. The church is community property. The fire investigation is closed. This is a crime scene. Shadow took a step toward Wilson. The dog's gaze was fierce, warning. Your dog looks aggressive, Wilson said. Shadow is only aggressive toward liars. Wilson's hand moved toward his gun. Is that a threat? No, it's the truth. Elijah put the evidence in his pocket. Wilson noticed. Those items are crime scene evidence. You must hand them over. Which crime scene? Wasn't the investigation closed? Wilson was cornered. Either it was a crime scene and the investigation was ongoing, or it wasn't and Elijah could do as he pleased. Mr. Brooks, you don't seem to be welcome in this town. Shadow and I specialize in unwelcome places. Wilson turned to his car, but shot a threatening glance as he left. Shadow relaxed. The enemy was identified, the lines drawn. Partner, the war is officially on, the dog wagged his tail. Wartime was his favorite time. That afternoon they met with Reverend Johnson. Elijah showed him the evidence he had found. Gaskin lid, lighter, blood-stained cloth. Are you taking this to Wilson? No, Wilson is an accomplice. The Reverend was shocked. The police chief? Mrs. Williams saw the deputy sheriff there too. My God, then who can we trust? The FBI or the state police? Mr. Brooks, these people run this town. They're very powerful. Danny's killers were powerful too, but Shadow and I defeated them. Shadow went to the Reverend and rested his head on him. The dog's warm presence comforted the man. Why is Shadow doing this? Because he's protecting you. Shadow loves good people. Reverend Johnson stroked Shadow with tears in his eyes. Our families have been going to this church for 150 years. Our grandfathers, our fathers, our children. We'll build a new church, Elijah said resolutely. How? There's no money, no land. Shadow and I will find a way. That evening at the motel, Elijah did some internet research. He looked into the history of the Henderson, Caldwell, and Morrison families in town. They were all old plantation families. They had lived on this land for generations. And since the civil rights era, they had had problems with the black population. Shadow sat next to Elijah watching the screen. As if following the research. Shadow, it looks like these families are continuing the KKK tradition. The dog growled softly. But they're secretive now. No official organization, just family tradition. Elijah's phone rang. It was Mrs. Williams. Mr. Brooks, I have bad news. What happened? Mrs. Carter's house was burglarized tonight. She saw the fire too. Was Mrs. Carter hurt? No, but she's very shaken. She won't talk anymore. I understand. Mr. Brooks, maybe you should quit. These people are very dangerous. Mrs. Williams, we're dangerous too. Shadow barked as if in agreement. Late at night, Shadow suddenly woke up. The dog looked toward the door, ears pricked. Elijah woke up too. There were noises outside. He looked out the window. 3 pickups were parked in the motel lot. Men were getting out. Shadow, time to go. They climbed out the back window. Shadow led the way, moving silently. The cars weren't where they'd parked them. Someone had moved them. No vehicles. We'll walk, Shadow nodded. Walking was his job. They headed toward the woods on the edge of town. Shadow moved forward as if he knew the way, finding safe routes. They stayed in the woods until morning. Shadow kept watch. Elijah slept a little. At dawn, they arrived near Reverend Johnson's house. But the house was surrounded. Shadow, they found the Reverend. The dog approached anxiously. One of the house's windows was broken. The door was open. They went inside. The house had been ransacked, but Reverend Johnson was nowhere to be seen. Shadow sniffed around, searching for the Reverend. The dog headed for the basement. The basement door was locked. Elijah forced it open. Reverend Johnson was there. Bound, gagged, but alive. Reverend, are you hurt? He spoke after his bonds were cut. 4 men came last night. Henderson, Morrison, Caldwell, Bradley. What did they want? They wanted me to find you. To deliver a message. What message? If you don't leave town, next time it won't be the church burning, it will be people, Shadow growled. They were under threat. Reverend, you need to stay somewhere safe. Where? There's nowhere safe in this town, Elijah thought. Then he made his decision. I'm calling the Alabama State Police. We can't trust the local police anymore. Will the state police come? I'll file a federal civil rights case. With the evidence Shadow found. Shadow wagged his tail. The plan was set. Reverend, we need to hide for one more day. Then we'll make our big move. What move? We'll tell the whole world the truth. Alabama State Police Trooper Maria Gonzalez listened carefully to the voice on the phone. Elijah's federal civil rights case filing had caused quite a stir. Mr. Brooks, we've reviewed your evidence. These are very serious allegations, said Trooper Gonzalez. Trooper Gonzalez, the evidence Shadow found is just the beginning. There's more. Shadow sat next to Elijah, watching the phone conversation. The dog's amber eyes followed his master's every word. We're sending a team to Millbrook. But be careful. The local police may not be trustworthy. We already know that. Police Chief Wilson is an accomplice. Gonzalez was surprised. That's a very serious allegation. We have a witness, Mrs. Evelyn Williams. She also saw the deputy sheriff at the scene. After hanging up the phone, Elijah looked at Shadow. Partner, help is coming. But first we need to find more evidence. The dog wagged his tail and stood up. It was time to work. They had been safe in Reverend Johnson's basement. Now it was time for daytime reconnaissance. Reverend, where does the Henderson family live? North of town. A big plantation house. The Caldwells are nearby too. Let's take a look with Shadow. Mr. Brooks, it's very dangerous. Their land is private property. Shadow and I are experienced at entering private property. Elijah and Shadow set out early in the morning toward the Henderson plantation. Shadow scanned the surroundings throughout the walk, analyzing every sound, every scent. The plantation was a large house with white columns, typical antebellum architecture. Cotton fields stretched out around it. Shadow stopped near the house and lifted his nose. He had picked something up. What did you find, Shadow? The dog headed toward the barn behind the house. The old barn building was now used as a garage. Shadow sniffed around the barn. Then he stopped at a specific spot and looked at Elijah. There were gasoline stains on the ground. Fresh stains. Shadow, this is from the night of the fire. The dog continued. He stuck his nose inside the barn. Elijah approached cautiously. 3 pickup trucks were parked inside the barn, and they all smelled of gasoline. Shadow stopped next to one of the trucks. Elijah looked. It was one of the vehicles Mrs. Williams had described. There were gasoline cans in the truck bed. Empty cans. Find the evidence, Shadow. While taking pictures, Shadow suddenly alerted. His ears perked up. He took a tense stance. A man had appeared at the barn entrance. Jake Henderson, a man in his 40s, large, looking angry. What are you doing here? He shouted. We got lost, Elijah said calmly. This is private property. Get out of here. Shadow took a step toward Henderson. The dog's stance was threatening. Hold your dog. Shadow is only aggressive toward insincere people. Henderson's hand moved toward his rifle. Final warning. Elijah backed away but had taken the photos. We're leaving. Thanks for your help. Henderson was surprised. Elijah's calmness unsettled him. As they walked away, Shadow looked back. The dog had memorized Henderson. Shadow, that man smells like crime, doesn't he? The dog growled softly. He agreed. In the afternoon, they went to the Caldwell farm. It was smaller but better maintained. Shadow led the way with his nose again. This time, he headed for the shed behind the house. Inside the shed, there were some very interesting things. White sheets, crosses, and KKK costumes. Shadow, jackpot. While taking pictures, Shadow alerted them again. This time Billy Caldwell was coming. Who's there? He called out. Elijah came out of the shed. Hello, Elijah Brooks. I got lost on a tour. Caldwell was a young man, about 25, with a paranoid look in his eyes. Tourist? He asked suspiciously. Yes, I'm touring historic plantations. Shadow was studying Caldwell. There was a cold assessment in the dog's eyes. Your dog looks strange. Shadow likes historic sites. Historical sites, huh? What period are you talking about? Elijah realized Caldwell was struggling to hide his racism. General American history, the plantation system, the slavery era. Caldwell's face changed. The slavery era? That was a great time. Everyone knew their place. Interesting perspective. Now everything is mixed up. Black people don't know their place anymore. Shadow took a step toward Caldwell. The dog's gaze hardened. Your dog is aggressive. No, Shadow can only smell bad people. Caldwell realized he was being mocked. Get out of here. Now. Sure, the historic plantation was very enlightening. As they walked away, Caldwell followed them. But Shadow's gaze stopped him. That evening, they shared their findings with Reverend Johnson. Gasoline cans in Henderson's barn, KKK costumes in Caldwell's shed. My God, so they're still active. Shadow is very aggressive towards them. Dogs can't lie. Shadow sat down next to Reverend and rested his head on his leg. Shadow protects me, said Reverend with a smile. Shadow loves good people and hates bad ones. That night they called Mrs. Williams. She was terrified. Mr. Brooks, Henderson is calling me. He's threatening me. What is he saying? He says I'm lying, that if I talk I'll be in trouble. Mrs. Williams, the Alabama State Police are coming. You're safe now? I hope so. I'm so scared. Shadow and I will protect you. The next morning there was a major development. Trooper Gonzalez called, Mr. Brooks, we're coming to Millbrook. A federal investigation has been launched. When? Tomorrow morning. But be careful. The local police could harm you. We're ready. After hanging up, he looked at Shadow. Partner, tomorrow's the big day. The dog barked. He was ready. But that evening a big problem arose. Wilson and his men found Reverend Johnson's house. Brooks, get out, Wilson yelled. Shadow growled. It was time to fight. Reverend, back exit. The basement window. But it's very small. Shadow can get through. So can I. As they climbed out the basement window, Wilson was trying to break down the door. Shadow led the way, and they slipped silently into the garden. But they were surrounded. Men were on all sides. Shadow, fight or flight, the dog thought. Then he ran in a specific direction. Henderson, Caldwell, Morrison, and Bradley had surrounded them. But Shadow had found the weak spot. At the edge of the forest, Morrison's son Derek was standing. Young, inexperienced, Shadow ran towards him. Derek panicked and cleared the way. They escaped into the forest. Shadow, perfect tactics. The dog wagged his tail. He liked praise. They hid in the forest all night. Shadow kept watch. Elijah slept a little. Wilson and his men searched the forest until morning. But Shadow was very well hidden. At dawn, the sirens of the Alabama State Police were heard. Shadow, we're saved. 3 police cars had entered the town. Trooper Gonzalez and his team. Elijah and Shadow waited at the edge of the forest. He called Gonzalez. Trooper, we're in the woods. Wilson is trying to find us. We're coming to your location. Send your GPS coordinates. Half an hour later, Gonzalez and 2 troopers found them. Mr. Brooks, are you hurt? No, Shadow protected us. Gonzalez examined Shadow. Very smart dog. Shadow is my best detective partner. Can we see the evidence? Elijah showed the photos on his phone. Gasoline cans, KKK costumes, burn marks. This is very serious evidence. We're arresting Henderson and Caldwell, and Wilson and Bradley too. They're accomplices. We need to complete the federal warrant paperwork first. When they returned to town, there was great turmoil. News of the federal investigation had spread. Groups had gathered on Main Street. Whites on one side, blacks on the other. Shadow sensed the tension. He pricked up his ears, ready. Wilson was furious when he encountered Trooper Gonzalez. This is my jurisdiction. No federal interference. Mayor Wilson, civil rights cases fall under federal jurisdiction. This Brooks guy is stirring up trouble in town. Gonzalez looked at Elijah. Mr. Brooks, respond to the allegations. Trooper Shadow and I are just looking for the truth. If the truth is causing trouble, then the problem is the truth. Shadow looked at Wilson. There was a cold assessment in the dog's eyes. Wilson was uncomfortable with Shadow. Why is this dog looking at me like that? Shadow likes liars, Elijah said coldly. That's slander. Shadow is never wrong. Gonzalez intervened. Mayor Wilson, the federal investigation has begun. You will not interfere, Wilson stormed off angrily. But he had plans. That evening, tension in the town was at its peak. Federal agents were gathering evidence, talking to witnesses. Mrs. Williams bravely testified, I saw Jake Henderson, Billy Caldwell, Derek Morrison, and Deputy Bradley. They set the church on fire. Trooper Gonzalez, are you sure? I've lived in this town for 65 years. I know everyone. Other witnesses came forward. Mrs. Carter finally decided to speak. I saw it too. 4 pickups, gas cans. At 2:30 a.m., Shadow sat quietly during the witness statements, but he was constantly scanning his surroundings. When the federal evidence collection was complete, Gonzalez spoke to Elijah. Mr. Brooks, we have a strong case. But be careful. Why? These men are cornered. Desperate men are dangerous. Shadow raised his head, as if sensing danger. Shadow thinks so too. Around midnight, Elijah realized Elijah was right. From the motel room window, he saw pickups surrounding the place. Shadow, the big attack is coming. The dog was already ready. His body language was in battle mode. Henderson, Caldwell, Morrison, and a bunch of white men had surrounded the motel. Brooks, get out, they shouted. We're going to talk to you. Elijah pulled out his phone and called 911. Federal investigator under attack. Millbrook Motel. But the nearest help was 20 minutes away. Shadow looked at the door. There was determination in the dog's eyes. Shadow, you and I have to hold out for 20 minutes. The dog barked. The challenge was accepted. When the doors began to break, Elijah and Shadow were ready. This was a new battle for them. But they had fought together before. There was fire in Shadow's eyes. No one would harm his master. The motel room was about to turn into a battlefield. The motel room door creaked after the third kick. Elijah and Shadow had retreated to the back of the room. Shadow's body language was entirely in battle mode. His muscles tense, his teeth visible. His eyes focused on his target. Brooks, this is your last chance, Henderson yelled from behind the door. Leave town or else... Or what? Elijah replied calmly. We'll bury you next to the burned church. It was a clear threat of murder. And Shadow understood it. The dog let out a low growl, a sign he was ready for battle. The door swung open with a final kick. Henderson, Caldwell, Derek Morrison's son, and 3 other men burst in. Shadow sprang into action. The dog leaped at Henderson. The 176-pound German shepherd knocked the man to the ground. Henderson screamed, trying to defend himself. Shoot the dog, Caldwell yelled, but Shadow was too fast. He leaped from Henderson to Caldwell, knocking him down too. Elijah had also moved. His military training kicked in. He incapacitated Derek with one move. Shadow, back off. The dog immediately came to Elijah's side. The 2 of them retreated to the corner of the room. Henderson was covered in blood. Caldwell was shaking. Derek was writhing on the floor. That dog is an attack dog. Henderson yelled. No, Elijah said coldly. Shadow is a justice dog. He fights the bad guys. Just then they heard sirens. The Alabama State Police were coming. Henderson and his men panicked. Let's get out of here. But Elijah had closed the door. No one's leaving. The police are coming. Shadow stood in front of the door, not letting anyone escape. 5 minutes later, Trooper Gonzalez and his team entered the motel. Hands up. No one move. They arrested Henderson's group. Elijah explained the situation. They came to kill me. Shadow was just protecting himself. Gonzalez looked at Shadow. Is the dog hurt? No. Shadow knows how to fight. The trooper patted Shadow on the head. Good job, Shadow. The dog wagged his tail. He loved praise. Henderson yelled as he was being arrested. This town is ours. Blacks should know their place. Henderson, said Gonzalez, you committed a hate crime. A federal offense. Hate crime. I'm just preserving traditions. Those traditions are now crimes. The next morning there were major developments. The FBI joined the case. Special Agent Sarah Martinez was a civil rights expert. Mr. Brooks, this case has caused quite a stir, said Martinez. Good or bad? Good. The Civil Rights Division is fully behind us. Shadow was studying Martinez. The dog sensed her sincerity. Shadow approves of you, Elijah said with a smile. That's important. Dogs know good people. Martinez explained the situation. Henderson, Caldwell, Morrison, and Bradley will face federal charges. Hate crime, conspiracy, civil rights violation. Police Chief Wilson? Him too. Obstruction of justice, aiding and abetting. Elijah relaxed. Justice was finally being served. Agent Martinez, can we kinetically rebuild? There are federal programs, a special fund for historic church reconstruction. When they gave Reverend Johnson the good news, the man cried, My God, we'll rebuild the church after 150 years. Shadow went to the Reverend and rested his head in his hand. The dog's warm presence comforted the man. Shadow is happy too, said Elijah. This dog is like an angel. That afternoon, a big change began in the town. Federal agents were conducting a systematic investigation. Mrs. Williams spoke courageously. I was afraid for 65 years. I'm not afraid anymore. Why? Because Shadow and Mr. Brooks showed that the power of evil doesn't last forever. Shadow wagged his tail, enjoying the praise. Towards evening, Agent Martinez made an important discovery. Mr. Brooks, we found a lot at Henderson's house. What? KKK membership lists. 47 people in town are members. Elijah was shocked. 47 people. There are 3,000 people in this town. Yes, and they're all white men. They're working together to suppress the black population, Shadow growled. These numbers didn't sit well with him either. What else did you find? Cross-burning plans. A list of black families. A systematic intimidation program. Will they all be arrested? The ones who committed crimes, yes. The others will be under federal surveillance. This information shook the town. The black community was in shock. 47 people, Reverend Johnson murmured, almost a quarter of the white population. But they're powerless now, Elijah said. Their secrecy is over. Shadow nodded as if agreeing. That night a large community meeting was held. Black and white residents gathered together. Elijah spoke. A great change is beginning in Millbrook. But this change is in your hands. How? By not remaining silent in the face of racism. By speaking up when you see injustice. Shadow stood beside Elijah. The dog's presence calmed the crowd. An elderly white man stood up. Mr. Brooks, I've lived in this town for 70 years. I didn't know there was so much racism. Ignorance is also a choice, Elijah said diplomatically but clearly. You're right. I'll keep my eyes open now. This was a hopeful sign. The young black woman spoke up. Mr. Brooks, why is Shadow so special? Shadow can smell injustice. And he's never wrong. Shadow approached the woman and wagged his tail. Shadow likes you, Elijah said. At the end of the meeting, the townspeople thanked Elijah and Shadow. But their work wasn't done yet. The next day, a shocking discovery was made. Shadow found something unexpected on Henderson's property. While conducting a systematic search with the FBI, Shadow stopped at one point and wouldn't move. What did Shadow find? Asked Martinez. Elijah approached. Shadow was pointing at something buried in the ground. The FBI digging team was called in. 2 feet down, they found a metal box. Inside the box were shocking things. Lynching photographs from the 1960s KKK ceremonial robes, and most shocking, personal belongings of murdered black people. My God, said Martinez, this is evidence of serial hate crimes. Shadow stood very tense around the box. The dog sensed bad energy. How many deaths are we talking about? Asked Elijah. Maybe 8-10 people over the last 60 years. And none of them were investigated? Missing persons cases. Missing, not murdered. This discovery took the case to a whole new dimension. The highest levels of the FBI got involved. Director Williams called personally, Mr. Brooks. This is one of the South's biggest hate crime scandals. The evidence Shadow found. Shadow is an amazing detective. Give him a federal citation. Shadow wagged his tail, very pleased with the praise. When the news spread in town, it caused a huge shock. The black community was scared. The white community was shocked. We didn't know we'd been living with a murderer for 60 years, said an elderly white woman. You were ignorant, said Elijah. But now you see the truth. Shadow watched the people around him. The dog sensed the atmospheric tension. That evening, Reverend Johnson made a big announcement. New Hope Baptist Church will be rebuilt. The federal program has provided full funding. The community applauded. Shadow wagged his tail excitedly too. We owe Mr. Brooks and Shadow a lot, said the Reverend. You don't owe us anything, said Elijah. Shadow and I love fighting injustice. But there was still one more big move left. Someone from the Henderson group wanted to talk about the deal. Derek Morrison, the youngest and least criminal. Mr. Brooks, Derek said, my father and the others did worse things than me. What kind of things? The murders in that buried box. It started before I was born. Shadow studied Derek carefully. The dog sensed he was telling the truth. Who was involved? My father, Henderson, Caldwell's father, former police chief Carter. Is Carter still alive? Yes, in a retirement home. He's 85. This information took the case back 60 years. Agent Martinez was excited. Derek, if you cooperate, a sentence reduction is possible. I will. I'm sick of this racism. Shadow approached Derek. For the first time, he acted friendly toward the young man. Shadow forgives you, Elijah said. Derek's eyes welled up. This dog is very special. Shadow gives second chances, but only once, Derek nodded. He had made his decision to change. That night, thanks to Derek's information, a 60-year-old mystery began to unravel. Missing persons cases turned into murder cases. Old files were transferred to the FBI. Elijah spent his last nights in the motel room with Shadow. Shadow. Our work in Millbrook is done. The dog rested his head on him. But before we leave, We'll attend the church's groundbreaking ceremony. Shadow wagged his tail. He loved ceremonies. Then our new adventure will begin. The dog looked curiously. Elijah didn't know it yet. But tomorrow the phone would ring and a new mission would await them. Justice had been served in Millbrook. But there was still much injustice in the world, and Elijah Brooks and Shadow would be justice's most loyal warriors. In Memorial Park, in the center of Millbrook, it was a historic day. A groundbreaking ceremony was being held for the rebuilding of New Hope Baptist Church. Elijah and Shadow stood among the crowd, watching this important moment. Reverend Thomas Johnson's voice trembled as he approached the microphone. Today, we are not just laying the foundation for a church. We are laying the foundation for justice upon injustice. The crowd applauded. Black and white townspeople stood together, a first in Millbrook's 150-year history. Shadow stood calmly beside Elijah, but his ears scanned the surroundings. The dog's amber eyes seemed to grasp the significance of this historic moment. Have you ever witnessed a community change right before your eyes? For Elijah, this feeling had begun that morning at the flag ceremony in the town square. For the first time, black children had participated in the flag ceremony. "Mr. Brooks," said elderly Mrs. Williams, "thanks to you and Shadow, my grandchildren will grow up safely." Elijah bowed his head humbly. "Mrs. Williams, you are the real heroes. You spoke out by overcoming your fears." Shadow approached Mrs. Williams and rested his head in her hand. The dog's warm presence always comforted her. As the ceremony continued, FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez took the stage. The Millbrook case will be one of the most comprehensive investigations in federal civil rights history. All cases of missing persons from the past 60 years have been reopened. This announcement caused a huge stir. Reporters took notes, cameras rolled. Martinez continued. Thanks to the evidence found by the detective dog named Shadow, a network of systematic hate crimes has been uncovered. Shadow pricked up his ears at the mention of his name. He loved being praised. Federal charges have been filed against Henderson, Caldwell, Morrison, and Bradley. Police Chief Wilson has also been arrested. The crowd murmured in approval. When Elijah took the microphone, the sound system crackled. "People of Millbrook, you have taught me something important." "What is that, Mr. Brooks?" asked a woman. "That those who remain silent in the face of injustice are also responsible, but also that people can change." Derek Morrison stepped forward from the crowd. The young man had been cooperating with the FBI for the past 3 months. "Mr. Brooks is right. I also come from a racist family, but Shadow gave me a second chance." Shadow looked at Derek kindly. The dog could truly recognize people who had changed. "I learned from Shadow that it's not people's color that matters, but their hearts." These words deeply affected the crowd. After the ceremony, Reverend Johnson spoke privately with Elijah. "Mr. Brooks, change has begun in our town, but it will take years to complete. You took the most important step, Reverend. The first step is the hardest." Shadow sat between them, listening to the conversation. "What about you? Where to now?" Elijah was thoughtful. "Injustice is everywhere. Shadow and I will go wherever we are called, as long as we are ready." Just then his phone rang. "An unknown number. Hello?" An elderly man's voice came on the line. "Am I speaking with Mr. Brooks?" "My name is Frank Martinez. I'm calling from Chicago." Elijah listened carefully. "Yes, this is Elijah Brooks." "How can I help you?" "Sir, I'm a retired railroad worker. I worked for Burlington Northern Santa Fe for 35 years. Shadow sensed the seriousness in Elijah's phone conversation and raised his head. "What's the problem, Mr. Martinez?" Frank's voice trembled. "I was unfairly fired, and now I can't get my retirement benefits either." "When did this happen?" 2 years ago, but the real reason was because I reported a safety violation. The company wanted to silence me. Elijah began taking notes. "What kind of safety violation?" "The tracks were poorly maintained. Accidents were happening. I reported it, but my superiors covered it up." Shadow stood up. The dog's instinct sensed a new case of injustice. "Mr. Martinez, what kind of evidence do you have? Secret photos, audio recordings, internal emails, all stored in a secure location. Where do you live?" "In Chicago, but the company's headquarters are here." "Omaha, Nebraska." Elijah looked at Shadow. The dog nodded approvingly. "Mr. Martinez, Shadow and I will help you." "Really?" "It's a huge company. Burlington Northern Santa Fe. Shadow and I aren't afraid of big companies. After hanging up the phone, Reverend Johnson asked, "A new case?" "Yes, a railroad worker. Unfairly fired." Shadow wagged his tail. "A new adventure was beginning. Reverend, our work in Millbrook is done. Now it's time for another injustice." That evening, the townspeople bid farewell to Elijah and Shadow. Her spontaneous ceremony was held on Main Street. Mrs. Williams spoke. "Mr. Brooks and Shadow, you gave us courage. You taught us that we can speak up," a young black woman added. "Shadow showed us that injustice can always be defeated." Shadow, very pleased with the praise, kept wagging his tail. Derek Morrison gave the final speech. "I come from a racist family, but Shadow showed me that people can change, and now choose love, not hate." These words deeply moved the crowd. The applause lasted for minutes. Elijah took the microphone one last time. "People of Millbrook, you gave me hope. I saw that people can change, that communities can heal. Shadow and I are leaving here, but our hearts will remain here." Shadow barked, as if to approve the speech. "Injustice can be found everywhere, but so is justice. Someone just has to stand up." After the ceremony, Elijah and Shadow got into their car. With the lights of Millbrook behind them, a new journey began. "Shadow, we're going to Nebraska now." The dog settled comfortably. Journeys were his favorite things. The railroad company is huge, but you know how to research big companies' records, right? Shadow wagged his tail. He could follow any trail. As they merged onto the interstate, Elijah thought about the past. The journey that began in Montana had continued with Danny's revenge in Washington, D.C., Marcus's justice in Los Angeles, and now a great victory in Millbrook, partner. "We make a good team." Shadow rested his head on Elijah's leg. As they headed west on Interstate 80, Shadow watched the scenery from the window. The dog's sharp eyes recorded every city and town they passed. They arrived in Council Bluffs, Iowa at dawn. This small town on the Nebraska border was the heart of the railroad industry. While staying in a motel room, Elijah called Frank Martinez to learn the details. "Mr. Martinez, what exactly did you report?" Frank's voice was tired but determined. "Track maintenance was terrible. The rails were cracking. The joints were loose. The risk of an accident was very high. What did they say to you?" "First they ignored me. Then they said the cost is too high. Finally they told me to mind my own business." Shadow listened carefully to the phone conversation. "Then what happened?" "I persisted. They were afraid I might leak it to the media. Then they fired me for insubordination." "Where's your evidence?" "At my house in Chicago. In a safe." "Is it secure?" Frank hesitated. "My house was searched twice, but they didn't find the safe." Elijah realized this wasn't a simple labor issue. This was a systemic cover-up operation. "Mr. Martinez, can you come here and meet with us?" "Yes, I'll be there tomorrow morning." The next morning, Frank Martinez met Elijah and Shadow at a cafe in the suburbs of Omaha. He was 65 years old, strongly built but looked tired. Shadow approached Frank and wagged his tail. The dog sensed his honesty. "Very nice dog," said Frank. "Shadow is a professional at finding the truth." Frank smiled. "Then I've come to the right place." Over coffee, Frank recounted his story in detail. "I started at Burlington Northern in 1987. I worked on the track maintenance crew. For 35 years I did everything I could to keep the track safe." Elijah was taking notes. "When did the problem start?" "In 2018 the company merged. It became BNSF Railway. Then the cost-cutting began." Shadow sensed Frank's stressed voice and moved closer to him. "They cut the maintenance budget by 30%. They halved the staff. But freight traffic was increasing. Did the risks increase?" "A lot. The tracks were worn out, the connections loosened. Minor accidents started happening." Frank took out the photos. "Cracked rails, broken connection points, dangerous curves. I reported these repeatedly." "Did you get a response?" "At first they said, 'We're looking into it.' Then they stopped responding altogether." Shadow sniffed the photos. The dog could distinguish the smells of metal and oil. "Mr. Martinez, was there a major accident?" Frank's face fell. "In 2020, a freight train derailed in Wyoming. 50 cars derailed. 3 people died. Was this related to what you reported?" Yes, I had reported a cracked rail in that section 6 months earlier." This information shocked Elijah. People had died because of negligence. "What happened after the accident?" "A federal investigation began. The FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, came." "Did they talk to you?" "No, the company put me on sick leave. Then they fired me." Shadow tensed up. The dog had picked up the scent of a conspiracy. What was the reason they fired you? They said falsified safety reports. Fake safety reports? Yes, they claimed my reports were fake. Elijah understood. The company had silenced Frank by destroying his credibility. Did you hire a lawyer? I tried, but no one was willing to take on such a big company. Shadow licked Frank's hand. The dog was supporting him. Mr. Martinez, we fight this company. Really? They're very powerful. Shadow and I specialize in fighting powerful companies. That afternoon, they went to the BNSF railway headquarters in Omaha, a large modern building, a symbol of corporate power. Shadow stopped in front of the building and sniffed the air. The dog sensed something here. What does Shadow sense? Frank asked. The smell of corporate corruption, Elijah said with a smile. When they entered the reception area, security was bothered by Shadow. No dogs allowed. Shadow is a service dog. Americans with Disabilities Act. This wasn't technically correct, but it worked. They got an appointment with the corporate relations director, James Patterson, in his 50s, a corporate executive in a suit. Mr. Brooks, the Frank Martinez case has been resolved. He was fired for misconduct. What misconduct? Falsified safety reports. Shadow was studying Patterson intently. The dog's gaze hardened. Mr. Patterson, Frank's reports weren't falsified. The Wyoming accident proved that. Patterson became uncomfortable. The Wyoming accident was an operational error. It has nothing to do with Frank's reports. Shadow thinks you're lying. Patterson looked at Shadow. The dog's intense gaze made him nervous. Why is this dog looking at me like that? Shadow doesn't like liars. This is unprofessional. Elijah stood up. Mr. Patterson, if you don't restore Frank Martinez's rights, we will launch a federal investigation. Threatening me? Promise. Shadow stood up too. The dog's stance was threatening. Patterson backed away. This meeting is over. On the way out, Frank was worried. Mr. Brooks, we've made them even angrier. Frank. Shadow smells fear. Patterson was very scared. Why? Because he has a lot to hide. That evening, Elijah researched Federal Railroad safety records. Shadow sat beside him facing the screen. In the FRA, Federal Railroad Administration database, there was an official report on the Wyoming accident. Track failure due to inadequate maintenance. Warning reports were filed 6 months prior to accident. Frank was right, Shadow. The dog shook his head, but the company assassinated Frank's character to silence him. Elijah dug deeper. He found BNSF Railway's financial records. The maintenance budget had been cut by 35% between 2018 and 2022. During the same period, executive compensation had increased by 50%. Shadow, they sacrificed safety for company profits, Shadow growled. He hated this kind of injustice. The next day they made a shocking discovery. Thanks to Shadow's nose, they visited the maintenance yard where Frank used to work. Shadow conducted a systematic search around the yard. The dog stopped near a dumpster at the back of the yard. He put his nose to the ground and looked at Elijah. What did you find, Shadow? When Elijah dug, he found metal pieces. Old rail pieces, cracked connection points. Frank, are these the defective parts you reported? Frank examined them. Yes, these are the cracked rails I reported in 2019. Why are they buried here? Because they wanted to destroy the evidence, Shadow continued. This time he stopped in a different area. There were more metal pieces here, and a waterproof bag. Inside the bag were documents. Internal emails. One email was very damaging. From James Patterson, Regional Maintenance Director. Subject: Martinez problem. Martinez gets too nosy. His reports creating legal liability. Terminate him ASAP. Use performance issues as pretext. Frank, this email is from 2 weeks before you were fired. Frank was shocked. So it was a planned character assassination. Shadow found other things too. Secret financial records. Documents showing maintenance budget cuts being transferred to the CEO's personal bonus. Shadow, excellent detective work. The dog wagged his tail, pleased with the praise. When they brought this evidence to the Federal Railroad Administration, FRA, a major scandal erupted. FRA Inspector General Linda Rodriguez, Mr. Brooks, this evidence indicates systemic safety violations. Will you reinstate Frank Martinez? Not just reinstate him. BNSF Railway will face a federal investigation. Shadow nodded in agreement with Rodriguez. Your dog is very smart. Shadow always finds the truth. A week later, major developments occurred. Frank Martinez reinstated. With full back pay, BNSF Railway CEO resigned. Federal grand jury investigation began. Maintenance budget fully restored. Frank cried as he thanked. Elijah and Shadow. I never thought I could fight against the company I worked for 35 years. Frank. Shadow, and I just gave you courage. You were already right. Shadow approached Frank and rested his head in the man's hand. So Shadow accepted me. Shadow loves honest people. Frank stroked Shadow's head. This dog is a superhero. Shadow is a superhero of justice. After the case was solved, the media showed great interest. Railroad whistleblower vindicated by veteran and dog. Shadow the detective dog exposes corporate cover-up. BNSF railway scandal. Safety sacrificed for profits. Elijah spoke in a television interview. This case shows the importance of whistleblowing. People like Frank Martinez take risks for the safety of us all. Shadow sat quietly beside Elijah during the interview. The dog loved the media attention. What was Shadow's role in this case? Asked the reporter. Shadow found buried evidence. Without that evidence, the corporate cover-up would have continued. Shadow perked up at the mention of his name. As they left Nebraska, Frank saw them off. Mr. Brooks, Shadow, I don't know how to thank you. Frank, there's no need. You did the right thing. We just helped. Where are you going now? We don't know. But if there's injustice, that's where we go. Shadow wagged his tail at Frank one last time. It was time to say goodbye. As they headed west on the interstate, Elijah thought. The railroad case had shown the importance of corporate accountability. Shadow. Big companies sometimes sacrifice safety for profit. The dog shook his head, as if to say he understood. But people like Frank Martinez tell them to stop. Shadow watched the scenery from the window. There was peace in the dog's eyes. Justice served. When the phone rang, it was the signal for a new adventure. But that was another story. For now, Elijah and Shadow were traveling freely on the open road in pursuit of justice. Injustice could be anywhere. But so could they. And Shadow's nose would always find the truth.